actually began your career at Art Center College as a car designer.
Yes, I was educated. Product design is a subset of industrial design, automotive. I was one of the first cycle of students, that also took figure drawing, fashion drawing, and studied the works of Caravaggio and Miro and all the classic artists. So that allowed me to bring with me into my professional rendering work all the niceties of classic painting, light and shadow, particularly Caravaggio, and the sensibility of drawing people. And when I was doing all this work for architects for about 15, 16 years, I was the only one really in the country that would do photographic renderings of these buildings. It was an ambiance that nobody else was doing.
Or cars.
Or a car.
As they can all see. And you always snuck something into the background. I'm always so intrigued. Where did that come from?
Well, architecture, to me, it's part of the built visual landscape. Over half the world's population lives in cities. So we see architecture wherever we go. And that impressed me because that is, in fact, the de facto background to our lives, really. I mean, a lot of us go out in the country. When I was going to Art Center, we'd drive down to the coast to breathe pure oxygen coming in and off the ocean. But that whole sensibility allowed me to bring a very refined professional eye to what I was doing.
So when you were doing that, how did you get to this?
Well, this is the back end of V'ger. And they said, would you like to work on a science fiction film? And I thought, well, it's a job, sure, why not? Absolutely zero idea of what this was supposed to look like. What they'd done so far was to have a camera track, and they just modeled a clay, whatever, to follow the camera track. And I said, what we need is a sense of scale, and this thing was huge. This is what you saw when they came out of the cloud into the space around the V'ger entity. And so it was a six-sided, twisted, it reminds me of Noguchi. It was a twisted volume about, I don't know, who knows, 30, 40 miles long, who cares? So that produced this hexagonal geometry all the way through the whole thing. This model was 47 feet long in a zero visibility environment. They were doing in-camera runs about 7 times. Paramount had promised shopping centers across the country that they would open. And Paramount was flying what they call wet prints cross-country in private jets to make these deliveries. So doing in-camera, runs over each other, that was daring in the extreme.
Well, they got this kind of texture going, right?
Yes. Well, Robert Wise, one of the grand old gentleman directors of Hollywood, he saw my sketches and he said, Syd, I like them, but he said, what I'd like to see is more of an element of mechanical object or device overlaid by organic growth. So this is what I came up with. So you can see there's a mechanical sense to this whole thing, but it's overlaid with a very intense organic layer of accumulation of who knows what.
So you're talking about all the visual things, but what I've always thought is remarkable about the way you've been working is you also look at it kind of as a functional designer with engineering aspects and so forth and so on.
Yes.
And so that's, to me, seems kind of unique in the world of science fiction, where people just do whatever and figure, okay, it looks good. So where does this kind of stuff come from?
Well, industrial design. This image is from a movie never produced called Topeka. So in the script, it mentioned this hero character in his apartment, and the blades were creating this shadow that went click, 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 and I thought, that means we got a fan. Let's do wind power. We'll put his apartment at the top of this surround, and it generates electricity as it would if you have a stator and a rotor. And if you wanted more electricity, you just move the outside crown together to create more electricity. So it was a very logical thing to do.
What I kind of get a glimpse of every once in a while is you challenge the conventions, like we're all in a subway and we're all looking straight ahead or straight out the sides. And here you come along with a meat cleaver and hack off the front of this subway. What's that about?
Well, the aerodynamics in a closed system with two bypasses, this shunted air to the outside of the tunnel because they'd pass, and this cutoff was to essentially force the air to the outside of the tunnel down that side of the train. And in my fevered imagination, that was a good thing.
But I saw it as something else. I also saw it as like the motorman is sitting there,
Yes.
and he's got a good view.
And he's union, so even though it's self-operating, they have to have him.
That is sort of the same thing when you got into this jalopy.
Yes.
This pattern
Well-
of thinking with big mashup of stuff.
Well, it was punk. And in the script, for some reason they were having these, I think it's a 35 Jaguar close-coupled saloon. And they wanted it to be an air vehicle. And I thought, here's how we'll do this. We'll have these big enclosures where the wheels used to be. It was still a recognizable Jaguar saloon, but it had this completely different aspect to it because of all this punk stuff and then the wheel wells.
But you're just dismissing what you invented, which he does a lot, guys. He just slides into this sort of, I think I'll have an air suspension for my Jaguar. And then he draws it, and damn, it's convincing.
And if you're doing punk, you just add crap, tubes and stuff. And I'm talking on the phone. I'm thinking, we need another thing right there, and go up over the fender. And so it's a kind of accumulative. And once you start the process, it sort of almost builds itself because you put this there, and you think, I'll put a little knot on that. And it sort of builds itself as you go along. It's additive.
That additive thing is kind of the opposite of this other hat that you wear. And that's this hat of the kind of robotic musculature. I look at this and I think that's the same vocabulary on this dog and on this motorcycle.
The dog, which was a war dog, had lasers coming out of its eyes. And so I went on Google, thank God for Google, and got high-speed stop-motion photographs of a cheetah, which is the 70 miles an hour for a short burst. And so I used that articulation because the cheetah, the reason it's so fast is the rear legs come way forward of the head to launch it into the next step. So it's going very, very, very efficient. The motorcycle, a lot of you probably ride. I don't. But I wanted to have this animalistic look with no axles, that's the new thing, and an articulated frame. So you and the wheels are completely separate, sort of like mountain bikes. It had a look to it for that reason.
Yeah, it actually has a personality.
Yes.
Which Kawasaki and Honda
Yep.
would love to have, right? But this is the thing, a machine aesthetic to having an emotional vibe. I think it'd be interesting to hear how you work with the cinematographer and the director in creating the imagery that then lends itself to filmmaking.
Well, first of all, it is the script. That's where you start. People say, well, Mr. Mead, how do you get your ideas for the film? I'm illustrating a script in conversation, one-to-one with the director. I don't work on a film unless I can talk to the director one-to-one. And the reason for this is, in any hierarchical structure, the top guy is the final yes or no personage. So what you do is you go to the top of the yes-no stack. That's the director on a film. Because if you enter down here, you hand your drawing over to the studio director, he hands it over to the cinematographer, and finally he gets to the director and he says, God, that's crappy, I don't like that. Well, you don't know that until it all comes all the way back down the stack and you're wasting time. By talking to the director with the script directly, you get to where you're going faster, and it's very efficient. So I'm coming back from Florida, and I've been FedExed a script for Aliens by Jim Cameron. And the script said there's a huge forest of antenna entering frame from the left, going there. And I thought, okay, so I did this big ball with antenna coming out the front. Jim Cameron is living on Monahan Drive at the time. I went to his house. So he said, well, you know what? He said, we have to pull focus because this is a ball going past a focused lens. He said we should make it flatter. So he did draw me a sketch, and then I came up with this. It has 2 planet destroyer guns and has a nuclear drive, and I scaled it all out, did cross sections. So it was a very, very rational design.
Yeah, the cross sections are really convincing. I don't have them in this stack, but But the cross-section, any architect would be able to immediately identify
Yeah.
it's dimensional. It's all worked out. And what's worked out in even more detail in the alien ship is the interior
Yes.
and the hibernation pods.
So I did an articulation study of these units. That was handed to Cameron, and the props were built just like this. So when they opened, you had sort of a scissor sliding arm. So they grouped them side by side with a single feed. So in the next image, and then through the mirrors at the back.
They put a mirror at the back,
yes.
right?
And so it went on forever.
Is that thrilling to have them take a drawing of yours and then voila?
Let's say you build this bank vault, and it's foam core board and plywood. You spray it silver, and it looks. Then you open it in the movie, and you dial in sound, and it weighs 10 tons. You know, you complete the illusion of the techniques that they use to make movies.
So the sound connotes the mass, is what
Yes.
you're saying. And we're now going to change direction radically into atmospheres.
Ambiance.
To set this scene, this is the scene in Blade Runner. This very ordinary guy is being interrogated with a machine of Syd's design. And so the pivotal thing in this case was the Voight-Kampff machine.
Mm-hmm.
How did that come about?
I got a call from Ridley, and he said, "Syd, I don't like what they've come up with." And I thought, well, that's too bad. He said, "I need this machine which focuses on your eye and takes care of the iris dilation and all that." And I thought, I'd read about pheromones. Animals can smell fear because you give off a pheromone addition to your normal perspiration. We'll have this thing breathing, which makes it look alive. It all folds into this nice case, and this thing comes up, blah, 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 and it goes, it focuses on your eye, and it's aggressive, but it's very delicately aggressive. And in my mind, I thought, so you walk into your office in the morning, and on your beautiful polished walnut and glass desk is a big tarantula sitting there. I thought, that'd be really cool. So that sort of inspired me to do this alarming, aggressive machine, but with very delicate parts.
And what I thought was so interesting, and at the beginning of this talk, you mentioned some classical painters. This is a relationship that I very often think about when I think of your drawings, compositionally. So where's the starting point?
Their geometry was elaborately intricate, planning the center of the picture and moving things over here and cross-referencing red up here, red down here, because the trick is to keep your eye moving around the picture and not wandering off. Now, Dufay had the back end of a horse going off out of frame to the right. That was a breakthrough, to have things going off frame in a painting.
So in a composition like this, you're using those same elements, like a masking element in the front, creating depth.
Well, we were told you have to look past something to get depth. It's natural to put it in shadow, and the great masters would do the same thing. You're looking past a shadowed object, people, bushes, or whatever. Then you see out into the sunlight. You also need a scale reference. So these are the cars, the vehicles going up this ramp. Then in the far, far, far background, almost to the top, you see this one just like the one on the far left. It's arrived at the top. So you say, that is that, way back. That means that's a long ways away. It gives you a planned illusion of distance. In photography, everything past 50 feet is flat. You know, the picture pane goes flat. You see parallax, that's the only reason you can tell it's 3D, a tree across the road. So being conscious of that, you accelerate the depth of field and keep it all in focus, but you play with the scale of things that you identify, and they go into the background.
That takes us right to Rudolf Arnheim, which you students out there should probably study. He is a great theorist in terms of composition and art, to understand the dynamics of what was going on in that frame. Looked at those vectors that would animate the frame. Mm-hmm. So what you were just saying about earlier, I thought kind of applied directly to this.
Well, Blade Runner, the first thing Ridley said to me was, he said, this is not going to be Logan's Run. If you're familiar, if you're familiar with Logan's Run, it's sort of GE Kitchen of tomorrow, you know, white and beautiful. So then I got the script and found out this is going to be a really grungy dystopian world because Ridley wanted to make a science fiction film with a noir cast, a set to it. So I went to work and I was hired to do the vehicles only. And I said they're characters, they have to look different, very remarkably different, instantly recognizable. I wanted to show them in the venue, in the situ, in which they'd actually be used in the film. The idea for the city itself, using New York and Chicago perhaps, of these canyons of high-rise buildings. The back lot at Warner Brothers, the back lot structure only goes up to just about where that street light feature is. Then everything from on up has to be invented. And my theory was, if we're going up to 3,000-foot high buildings, you'll have an exchange security lobby at about 20th floor, 25th floor, and nobody goes below that if you're decent people. So the street becomes a basement where you store all the stuff on the sidewalk, transformers and condensers and all this stuff going up to feed these big buildings. And so that's why it took on this look. It was fascinating to do.
And compositionally, you go all the way into that shop in the lower right-hand corner.
Yes, and that happens very fast because the color palette was sort of, you know, the same, sort of splooshy grays and then this splash of garish color. So once you get started, I was working about 3 or 4 of these at once. I do a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit there. And so they went fairly fast. They're only about this big.
That's right, folks. This whole drawing is about that big.
So the color, the ambiance, the guy sitting against the building, sort of, who is it sort of had a whole social, mechanical, and story dramatic look to it. Ridley loved it, so I painted my way into the rest of the picture. Now, I'll tell you an interesting story. This shot, see the downtown thing going down? Ridley liked that. I just made it up. I thought, we got to do something with this flat backlot street. He had people actually dig a hole. Remember when Zora is hiding down there at the bottom of the stairwell? That was the bottom of this set that he had dug into the ground. Sebastian was a tinkerer, as you remember from the story. And I thought maybe he does mechanical tinkering. So this is a vehicle built from scrap parts you'd find in a junkyard in 2019. This was 1980, so it was a stretch, but it was also fun to do. So it's a whole invention that fit the story.
And this is the polar opposite.
The spinner. It's iconic. There's been a lot of models made. There's a 1/24th scale made in Japan, which is very accurate. I didn't want this to have fold-out wings or helicopter blades or anything. So I read about a kind of vehicle called an aerodyne. An aerodyne generates all of its lift internally, like the Harrier jump jet and the new F-35. Now, you need a very robust power source to do this. So I just said, well, it's a movie. Of course we have a robust power source. What's the big worry? So it lifts off, and in the movie, the original movie, you saw the wires through the rain, and they digitally remastered the movie, and they took those wires out. Then the next one is the interior. The interior was very detailed, and they built it just like this. The screen was a read of a person they were following, and because replicants had sort of a standardized skull and then flesh and muscle overlaid on it just for production. And so I invented that in my head, again, late at night, painting this stuff, and I thought, well, that makes perfect sense.
Well, this is my favorite drawing of all of them, I guess. And you just said that there were lots of Japanese models of this, huh?
Yes. Yeah, all kinds. So the guys at Lego made me a Lego spinner about this long, very accurate. Took them about 3 days. So I have that in my house perched on display. The idea was to create a vehicle that was paramilitary, police, you know, that's why the gun, which could go down and go up and down, or go up over the top and traverse. So it was, you know, usable. The interior was very highly detailed in this view, and you're looking past the vehicle down to the street, And that's sort of mushed together because it's out of focus and so forth. But you get the sensation of traffic and people walking around. So it completes the illusion that it's a flying car.
What I like to point out to my students, I don't know if you guys in the audience can see that, but you can see the pencil strokes here on the cockpit. Can you see that?
Oh, you mean I didn't cover them up?
You did not. There's a flaw in the drawing.
Oh, God.
It's definitely flawed. And
These were done very fast. Great. In fact, there was, Holden was the guy who got shot, right? Remember they're in, Deckard's in Brian's office, which is shot in the Union train station. How's Holden? He says, well, he's okay if we don't unplug him. Remember?
yeah,
So I'd read about flotation beds for people with serious burns and energy injuries. So I designed this octagonal room, and the patients would be out accessible by nurses and stuff on the other side of this octagonal wall surface, which had life, vital sign things. And you'd go in to visit through one facet of this octagonal room. That was the entry. And then they'd slide out your friend or whoever they're coming to visit from that side into that room. You could walk. So I'm rendering this shot. And Lawrence Paul, the production designer of Blade Runner, gave me a call and he said, you know, Syd, they've canceled that shot. So I was in the process of painting the floor grid and I thought, whoa, so it was never finished. You know, if you do it for nothing, you have a hobby, you know what I'm saying? So that's it.
on that note, thank you, Syd.